as she went into Claude, she went directly as the crow flies and opened 13 wire gates between here and Claude. She loved the little Rutherford boys because she'd go through the in her buggy. She'd hitch her horse, get the babies in the buggy with her, and get ready to go into Claude, the 14 miles. I guess it would take her all day long, and she probably took her lunch. But when she got to the Rutherford place, the little Rutherford boys would run out and open 2 gates for her as she went through their corrals. And she said, as long as she lived, I love the Rutherford boys. She carried some tall boots in her buggy because always the cattle and the horses tramped out under the gate. It was lower and there was always a mud puddle. So she'd put on her boots and go through the gate and go on her way. And she said many of the times she made the trip and the letter wasn't there. No mail was there. But I have a feeling, knowing her and knowing her family, that it wasn't many times because they did always write letters, long letters, and you felt like you'd had a visit with them. And that sustained Georgia because her family was dear to her and she'd come a long way off here. But cowboys came by, and this woman who in later years would be frightened to stay overnight by herself in town, she'd be left on long weeks when Jim would go to Missouri to buy bulls. And if somebody called at the back door after they'd gone to bed, she would tell him where to put his horse and where to go to spend the night in the bunkhouse. They had built a bunkhouse by then, and she said many's the time someone would walk in for breakfast that she did not know was on the place, and she'd set another place and add a little more dough to the biscuits and feed him. The house grew from 2 rooms to 10 by the time they had lived here 20 years. Maybe not quite that long, about 16 years, which showed a good bit of progress and a lot of carefulness in taking care of their finances. They learned to raise a little wheat. They broke out some of this sod that had meant so much to the cowman, and they raised some wheat, and then they learned that there was a small grain called maize that they could raise that was wonderful cattle feed. And Jim tried awfully hard to always have enough left over from one year to the next, because the cattle never were deprived of anything. He learned this lesson early on. When drought comes, and drought does come with great regularity to the cowman in the panhandle of Texas, in due time the children started to school at the country school. They rode horseback, and I think the horse they rode was old Red Light. I've heard them talk about Red Light. I feel like he was almost a part of the family. They rode Red Light and went to school and took part in all the activities. The family got a car in due time. The man that sold it to Jim called out and said, "Miss Christian, put a wire over the gate. He's coming out with that new car and he doesn't know how to drive it." One Sunday, they had all gone to church. Terrell was not feeling well. He was a small child and he was attracted to guns. The hired man stayed home with him that day. This room we're sitting in was the kitchen, and there was a flue that went up through what is now the fireplace, and a little cabinet had been built, a little linen cabinet in connection with the flue. Terrell persuaded the hired man to get the Colt 45 that was Jim's pride and joy that he'd carried for so many years, and let them look at it. And when they were looking at it, somehow it went off and shot through the closet. George's linens were all folded in a little pack there, and a hole went through every fold. Georgia was fit to be tied when she came in and saw what had happened, and I'm sure that the gun was put completely out of sight, and the next time Terrell stayed home from church, he was admonished what to do and what not to do. They were stern disciplinarians, but they had lots of fun too. Besides reading at home, they played lots of table games and whatever was going around. And And the boys were into athletics. Terrell was a very fine athlete. He was like his father, quick and strong, and a very good sprinter, and a good football player and a baseball player. When the three older ones were ready to leave the country school, the family bought a home in Clarendon, moved down there, and took one or two of the neighbor girls with them, and they went to Clarendon College. It was there that one of the girls married, Inez married Forrest Dozier, and Jones came back to work on the ranch, and Avis went on to get more schooling. The last year or two of Terrell's, one year he and his mother stayed in Claude for him to go to school. Now we think nothing of driving into Claude, but there was no pavement at all, and cars were not readily available, so it was better that they just stay in town. They roomed in town, and he went to school there. Then his last 2 years, they bought a home in Canyon, and his father would commute to the ranch and to Canyon on weekends, and Mrs. Christian and Terrell lived in Canyon. And that's where I met him, and that's when we take up our story. This is really the story of three men, Jim Christian, Terrell Christian, and Tom Christian, and their helpmeets who have lived on this ranch for almost 100 years. And Terrell and I came when we married in 1929. I was not quite 19, and he was 22. He was 3 years older than I. We had had some time at West Texas in college together, and I had taught school a year. And we came out here with our eyes full of stars, and a delight to be out. I'd never lived in the country, but I had, my mother had ranching background, and I had always had a pony in our little town, and I would get to ride, and I enjoyed that.